Hi, I'm Thomas. Welcome back to Project Management Fundamentals. Today's lecture is on project identification and design. We're going to cover four main topics in the lecture: data collection and data analysis, then project intervention logic, which is a tool that we will use to work through a logical progression from the activities we're performing and how those activities will allow us to eventually reach the goals of the project. And then finally looking at decision gates, which are points during the project when we decide to proceed, modify the plan, or end the project. Let's start with talking about data collection. Here in this description of the purpose, the key point, and you can read the description given, the key point is to stay open-minded. We're looking to solve a problem, and the causes of the problem aren't always obvious, and often the community or perhaps the entity that is developing a project to solve a problem might have a theory or an idea about the cause of the problem that isn't accurate. So we want to stay open-minded, look at what the data tells us, and then decide what is it that we need to do to ensure an effective solution to the problem. Triangulation is a tool that we use to make sure that we have the right understanding of what the real needs are in a community. In this process, we're looking at four different types of needs. Felt needs, this is the concept of the wants of the community. These are the kinds of things that the community will tell you that they want if you ask them, or they need if you ask them. Express needs relate to what you see the community actually doing. Sometimes actions contrast with or conflict with stated wants and needs, and using observation to identify expressed needs is an important part of the needs identification process. Comparative needs, this is the concept of comparing the situation in the community with the situation of others to determine whether a situation does need to be changed, improved, resolved, or whether the situation given others' situations is reasonable. And finally, normative needs, also an evaluation or a comparison concept. We're looking here at what professional standards state is acceptable. Perhaps in the situation relating to education or a situation relating to health, there might be information or statistics that allow you to compare what your community situation is to what is an acceptable standard per professional standards, professional evaluation. This is the identifying needs process. We call this triangulation, using multiple sources of needs to understand what the real need is in the community. When we're collecting data, there are different types of data that we will be using. Secondary data is data that is already available due to work probably from a previous project in the community or maybe in a similar community. Primary data is data that you will collect as a part of your project. This could be qualitative, which is descriptions, a more subjective type of data, or it could be quantitative, numeric, more objective type of data. Secondary data is nice because it's available and it's not expensive because you're not doing the work to gather it. On the other hand, primary data allows you to customize and be precise in obtaining the kind of data that is exactly what you need or close to what you need for your particular project. And it's useful to mix these methods. You'll use some secondary data. You'll start by obtaining secondary data because, again, it's inexpensive and accessible in most cases. You'll also want to use primary data, and that will be qualitative and quantitative. Once you have data, you want to analyze that data and understand what is the current state of the community. We're going to look at the future state following. Looking at the current state is asking the question, what is happening now? And we have several tools that we can use for current state data analysis. A vulnerability matrix is a matrix that looks at probability of events along with the severity of events, which is a nice tool that will enable you to determine where there is an urgent need that needs to be addressed quickly. Ranking exercises relate to prioritizing a group of possible needs in a community. Gap assessment analysis is looking at where there isn't a service that is needed by the community. A focus group is a discussion-based tool to gather data from the community. And problem trees are diagrams that show cause and effect relationships so that you have an understanding of what the underlying causes are for issues or problems or challenges that you observe in the community. Data analysis is also used from a future state perspective, which answers the question, what will be different in the future? We consider the future state from the community consideration, from the community perspective, as well as from the organization perspective. From the community position, it's important to consider what needs are most important, what programs already exist that might be run by other organizations that are addressing the needs of the community. Is the program that we're considering appropriate from the standpoint of culture, perhaps religion of the community? And finally, what is the institutional capacity to be able to implement this project effectively for the community? From the organization perspective, resource availability is important. There need to be resources to be able to carry out a project. Feasibility and sustainability relates to asking the question whether the project is realistic, whether it's doable, and whether it will continue once we pass the project on to the community. And finally, the concept of program and portfolio fit is that when we're looking at one project, that project is probably not our only project. It's probably going to fit into one of the programs of the organization, and we want to be sure that there is a fit, there is a match between our experience and abilities and this particular project. Projects roll up into one particular program. In other words, a program is a group of projects, and programs roll up into a portfolio. Or we can say that a portfolio is a group of programs. And we want to check that this project is going to fit within the program it's a part of, as well as the portfolio it's a part of. Now let's look at the project intervention logic matrix. This is a matrix that we use to build up from activities to outputs to outcomes to our ultimate goals. As an example, we might be working in an education program, and activities, things that we're doing, supplies that we're purchasing, can lead to outputs, building schools. New schools can lead to outcomes, certain numbers or statistics relating to students being educated or achieving a particular test score. And the goal would be an educated community, or the elimination of illiteracy, or college readiness. So at the goal level, it is difficult to use a quantitative measure, but as we're working up from activities through the goal, we have various points where we can make measurements to see whether we're making progress towards the ultimate goal. Now, we just discussed the row titles, which we refer to as the vertical logic, which moves us up from activities to goals. Let's talk about the column titles, which we refer to as the horizontal logic: indicators, verification, and assumptions. Indicators are measures and observation of change. And to measure change, we need some kind of baseline measures or observations that took place before the project began. The verification of the indicators refers to the source of our measurements and observations. What kind of tools are we using? What kind of calculations are we doing? Are we using any experts that assist us in making the measures and observations? These are the sources of the indicators, and this is how we verify our measurements and observations. And then finally, assumptions. Assumptions are what we expect or assume to be true about external factors that need to be true if we're going to succeed in progressing from our activities to outputs to outcomes to goals. As an example, in progressing from outputs to outcomes, We might make the assumption that if we build schools, the community will send its youth to the schools. If that assumption isn't true, then building the schools isn't going to produce a result of an educated community. And finally, let's look at the concept of decision gates. These are points of decision during the life of the project when we decide to proceed with the project as originally planned, modify the project, or in some cases end the project. These will occur at regular intervals throughout the life of the project, and there are several benefits to the concept of decision gates. One benefit is the management of time and resource expenditure. At this point in the project, we're doing some research, we're considering project design, but we don't necessarily have a funding source yet. So we want to be asking the question, given what we know now, at this point in the project, we feel confident that this is a project that we can get institutional support behind or donor support behind to be able to get the funding we'll need to carry the project out. If we get to the point where we don't see that as likely, we don't want to continue to spend time and money on a project that isn't going to be funded. Another benefit of decision gates is that they allow for analysis of our project concept. Once we've collected and analyzed our data and completed our project intervention logic matrix, we have more information about and insight into the project concept than we did at the beginning of the project. And we can ask the question, knowing what we know now, does this still make sense as a project that will meet the needs of the community and will have the support of the community on an ongoing basis once we hand over the project so that the project is successful and sustainable? Decision gates also enable the project management team to maintain focus. Once you begin to do research, interact with the community, you're probably going to find out about other needs that would either expand the scope of your project or are unrelated to your project that might be real needs, but it's important to maintain focus, avoid scope creep, which means avoid letting the project get bigger and bigger and bigger and go beyond the original scope, the original issue it was designed to address. And finally, decision gates provide the project management team with the opportunity to step back and re-evaluate the original assumptions, make sure they're still valid and that they haven't changed, so that the project is still a valid concept. If there have been changes in the assumptions or something that the project management team has seen leads the team to believe that the assumptions were inaccurate, then that would call for possible changes in the project plan. This concludes the lecture on project identification and design. As with our previous lecture, when we meet together in class, we're going to continue with the project management scenarios we began to work with, using the new tools and concepts that we've learned in this lecture to continue to build your skills to apply these ideas and successfully engage in project management. And I look forward to seeing you in class.